Hi again, it's Andrew Burke from Code School Halifax, and we've now got ourselves a proper web page with HTML and structure and all of that, but it's, to be honest, kind of ugly. So we're now going to start making it look better using CSS, Cascading Style Sheets. And hang on, here we go. Now here we have our HTML page that we've been working on, and it's got all the tags and structure that's required for a modern HTML page, and that's great. But as you can see here, it does look kind of bland. It's not very exciting. It doesn't have a lot of structure that's visible. It's just some black text on a white background in Times New Roman. No spacing. Everything's kind of all glommed together. Not very interesting, and to be honest, not very useful. So we can fix that now. We're going to use CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it's a bit of a misnomer. It's mostly that, usually done with sheets, but you can do some styling directly in your HTML. It's really not recommended, but I'll just show you very quickly. If you wanted to style an individual element, and this is what it used to be with styling all the time back in the really old days of the early days of HTML in the mid-90s. You had to do your styling directly in the HTML, and it started like a good idea, but turned out to be a terrible idea really quickly. So we can do like color green right in here, and if we save and move over, you can see it's green now, okay? That seems like a good idea for being really direct, but the problem with that is if you have anything even slightly more complex than we have here, you end up lots of repetition, lots of clogging up your HTML with all these style directives. That gets really messy. It's hard to see what's going on anymore. And if you have more than one page, especially if you have a website rather than a web page, getting consistent looks across everything involves a lot of manual copying and pasting, and that's usually a recipe for disaster. So we don't tend to do that this way anymore. We use separate sheets, which come from, I think Microsoft Word uses style sheets, and I think they took some of the idea from that, and you can set up style sheets and swap them around and everything. But the idea is you want to set up a separate file and link it directly to our files here. And that file is going to be full of style. So it's a style sheet. It's going to have a bunch of directives that explain what needs to be done. So let's put that together here. And let's go in and add a new file. And we'll call it styles.css. Notice as soon as we said CSS, we got a new icon for the file. What's great with Visual Studio Code is you can sort of see all your files and what kind of file they are just by glancing down at these little icons. So that's really handy. And you'll see why we have that as a number sign or hashtag very, very soon. So here's our styles file. Here's our index file. And the first thing we need to do is to link these two files together. And the way we do that is putting a bit of code up in the head section. Now, if you remember, the head section was the place where you put things in that don't show up on the page but impact the page, like the title, for example, here. And linking files like style sheets and things is exactly what the head section is good for. So we just do a special tag, and you can see here it's a tag. It's got link rel equals style sheet is the attribute that tells you it's a style sheet, and href equals, and Visual Studio Code is smart enough to actually know that you're going to be trying to put a file in probably here, which means you can actually just pick it. It's going to autocomplete and auto-suggest some things for you. So styles.css. This is great because one of the biggest headaches in coding is getting a typo in the file name when you're linking the file. So this lets you avoid that. And then we do the special kind of tag, which is a self-closing tag. It doesn't have a close tag after it like we have p. It just has link style sheet href equals style CSS and then a slash before the ending. That's because it's not containing anything. It's just a thing standing by itself. Okay, so now we are linked in, and let's go back over here and reload, and we're back to just black. We have no way of seeing what's going on. But let's go here, and let's turn that header 1 back to being green again. Okay, just to sort of see what it does. And here's where we start doing some CSS. Now, a CSS file is basically a big list of directives, of things you want the browser to do. And they all go in a format of basically saying, here's the thing we want you to decorate, and then here's the decorations we want you to apply to it. So in this case, we're going to be changing this h1. So h1 is a tag, and you can refer to tags simply by typing the name of the tag in. Okay, so if this was something we were going to change all the p tags, it would look like that. But in this case, it's h1. And Then that's what we're going to change. And then right after that, we put curly brackets in. Okay, so these are curly braces. They're just above the return key, probably on your keyboard. They're the shift version of the square brackets. I remember teaching coding to a class, and one of the guys in the back was like, "I never knew my keyboard had so many different kinds of brackets." Well, it's true. You'll learn all the brackets and braces and dividers and things as you get more into programming. We have lots of different ones for different reasons. Anyway, here's our squirrely brackets, and inside you then set up your lists of directives. So they go something like this: color, for example, and you can see here it's giving you lots and lots of suggestions. So one thing you can do, if you're just sort of curious about all the things you can do, just start typing things in and see what Visual Studio Code suggests. And as you go through, you can actually see the little descriptions over here to explain what it is. And if you're really curious, you can click here and get the reference file. So that's a great way to sort of explore all the different things you might be able to do. But we're going to do really simple with just color. And here you can see it's actually even suggesting all the different colors we might want to use. Okay. Now there's basic colors. You can do white, red, green, blue, etc. There's all these other ones with different names, okay, fancy names. Colors also have these number codes, and we'll talk about that in a minute. These number codes are a little bit complex to figure out. Once you get the hang of them, they're kind of cool, but they're a unique identifier for a specific color. Anyway, we're just going to make this green for now, okay? And then you finish every section, every directive with a semicolon. Okay, so you can have lots of different directives for a thing, but you always end it with a semicolon. So let's save that. Okay, we've saved this file. We haven't done anything here. Just save the file, and let's go over back to here and reload. And now it's green. Okay. Let's do another thing. Okay. This, as you can imagine, let's guess, will center the thing. So let's do our 3-finger dance, 3-step. There we go. Now we've centered the title, which makes sense for the title because it ought to be centered. Now, it's usually not a good idea to do things like, well, if we wanted to make the color green, let's make everything green, because I think green's a good sort of medical color, maybe a teal. We can work on the fine points of the color later. But instead of making the H1 green, let's make everything green. And a way to apply a style to everything on a page is to use the body tag. Okay? You see your body covers everything on the page. So any style you apply to body will apply to everything. So let's take this color green out of here and save that and just double check that we're okay. Okay, there we go. And let's put it in the body section. And now reload the page. Everything's green, except for the links, but we'll get to those soon. Now you can see we've got our H1 has a text-align center and our body has a color of green. Now, one thing when we're dealing with colors, it's really nice with Visual Studio Code. Picking colors, assigning colors, especially if they're colors that don't have the names. You can find those names on various listings on the internet, but often you have like subtle colors you're trying to do and like delicate offsets and things like that. What's great with Visual Studio Code is if you roll your mouse over the color itself, it gives you this great color picker. So you can pick any color you want, maybe a greenish teal that even looks more medicinal or medical, at least institutionally medical. And you can pick up here and slide it around. And it gives you this RGB number, which is fine. That works. You can also click on it and get the hex code version. And you'll see this hex code around a lot. And it's hard to explain exactly, but basically colors are usually a mixture of red, green, and blue, at least on computer screens. And you can define them like this. And this is just another version of defining the same thing, but instead of using base 10, like most numbers we're used to, this uses base 16, and it does 3 sets of 2 for base 16. Anyway, long story, you can dig around and figure that out later, but once you've clicked on something, it now changes the color for you, okay? Maybe make it a little darker. There we go. Okay, you see that's changed. You don't even have to know what that means, you can just pick the color, and it gives you a little swatch right there in the code. So let's see what that looks like. It's a little light. Let's maybe make that a bit darker. There, that's nice. Okay. Okay, that gives us a sort of a good kind of medical looking thing. Okay, so there we go. Now, let's do a few more things. And one other thing, once you start getting busy with your CSS and your HTML, it's good to often have the HTML on one side and be able to look at your styles at the same time so you can figure out and match the right names properly. The best way to do that is to drag the tab over and put it on the side somewhere. So once you get close to the edge, you see the shading changes, and you just stick that right there. And you can tuck this away, make things a bit wider. What's nice with CSS is it's actually a pretty skinny language or skinny markup system, so you can slide it over and make it fairly small. In theory, you can put all your directives all on one line after each other as long as they're separated by semicolons. But in practice, it's usually a really good idea, and you'll see most people do this. Just have every directive, every little assignment is on its own line. Just keeps it cleaner and more obvious, and you can see what's going on better. Okay, so this way we can now see, here's our things that we're going to be styling. Here's our styles that we're going to be applying. Okay, so we have our elements here. Let's try a few more things. So you can see here we have these two sections, global count and country count. I added a class called boxed section because I figured at some point I'd want these two sections to be in a box. Okay, so I called them boxed section. Let's do that. Now, these are not just by tag. We could use div, I guess, but we're going to have divs in other places as well, and we don't want to mess up our code by over assigning things. But we've given it what's called a class, and we can refer to items by class directly in our CSS by doing this, by putting a dot in and then using the name. So dot boxed section is going to apply to this thing and this thing. So let's give that a shot, and we can do border. Now there's border width, border color. Let's do that green again. And border border style. Okay, so that's a way of doing that. Let's see what that does. Okay, now we've got borders. They're kind of cramped and everything, but you can see we have borders. Now, one thing people are so regularly doing, border width, border color, border style, that they've actually got a shorthand. You can just say border and then mix the two together. 1 pixel, or the 3. Okay, there we go. So that's all in one place, and it gives us the same thing. Now, these are all a little cramped, so let's add some margins and padding. Padding is the space between the content and the margin or the border. So padding, let's give it, for example, 10 pixels. So there's many different measurement units. CSS has been built by committee over several decades, several different committees, and various browsers that are fighting with each other. So there's many different ways to do things in CSS, and every CSS person has their own opinion of which is best. I tend to like to use pixels. Other people like to use EMs and other things, or points. Anyway, pixels will work fine. Everyone's going to have their own preference. Okay, there's some padding between the content and the edges. Okay, let's add some margin as well. Okay, you'll notice every time I make even one small change, I immediately pop over and see how it looks. That's really important when you're doing CSS. And one of the nice things of doing HTML work is you can quickly see what something looks like before you get too far along. And it's good to just, every time you make one statement, just pop back over and reload and see how it goes. Now, one other nice thing that might be kind of fun is to make these sort of curvy, kind of like pills, sort of, once again, very medical. Now, rounded corners used to be a really huge headache. You had to handcraft them with Photoshop and all sorts of complicated layout tricks and everything. But nowadays, it's really, really easy. This is one of these things where you kids don't get how easy you have it. Back in my day, we had to handcraft our rounded corners. But we can just do border radius and just give it a percentage or a number of pixels or whatever you want. So let's go 10 pixels and see what that does. Okay, gives us nice, somewhat rounded. Let's do 20 pixels, even more rounded. There you go. But you notice more rounded, this seems a little bit close to the left and the right. So maybe we want to change the padding a little bit for left and right. One thing you'll notice, if I've typed something wrong, like here, I forgot to put the D in. Okay, there's one D instead of two Ds. It doesn't color it right. You see, Visual Studio Code is coloring your code all the time. So you can sort of, as you're typing, get a sense of what's right. And it knows all the words that you're going to be using, all the magic keywords, because it knows CSS. So if you're typing something and it doesn't seem to be showing up properly, and especially if it's got little orange lines under it, it's usually a sign you've got something wrong. Okay? And you can even see here in the margin, it's kind of red. That shows that there's problems. Okay, so if we do type it right, it suddenly turns to the right color. And then we put the semicolon in and everything cleans up and it's like, okay, you're fine now. Okay, so if you leave a semicolon out, it gets upset. So that's a quick and easy way, and then it doesn't recognize this because it thinks it's all part of the same thing. Anyway, this is a quick and easy way to make sure that you're typing properly, which is always nice, because if you don't have these guides, it's easy to mess this up. But always keep in mind the proper name, colon, the thing, semicolon, and then just all on their own line. So let's save that and look at that. Okay, now you'll notice we have the regular padding up and down is still 10, but the padding left and right is 20. Okay, so it starts with this, and then it's going to have that, when you say padding, that's all directions, but you can specify individual directions as well. And it sort of starts with this one, and then the next item, it just goes from the top and works down. Okay, so there we go. And you see that's pretty good there. Let's take this global count as well, and because it's going to be the big one at the top that's going to be large text with the big headlines kind of thing. So we want to specify this thing, and it's not boxed section, it's not div, because that could apply to both of these. It's the ID. So remember we assigned IDs earlier, and I was saying we'll figure this out later why it's useful. Well, here's one of the places where it's useful. And just like with classes with a dot, we can assign IDs with this hashtag, or number sign, or octothorpe, or whatever you want to call it. Okay, and we just use whatever the name of the ID is. There we go. So you see global count, that matches as long as it has a number sign. That's why we have number sign here, because people are often referring to things by IDs in CSS. So it's so common that it's sort of turned into the symbol for CSS. Okay, and in this case, we want to make this font size 125%. Now, just like with padding, there's many different ways of specifying font size. You can use pixels, you can use points, you can use percentages, you can use EMs, you can use all sorts of different things. That's way beyond the scope of this, but I like to use percentages just because it gives us a relative size. And I'm going to do text align center, and that should be good. Let's see. Okay, font weight bold. Let's make it bold. Now there's font weight, which is how bold or thin it is. There's font style, which is whether it's, you can always try this. There's so many different ways of doing it, which is whether it's italics or not. And then there's text decoration. It's not font anymore, it's text decoration, where you can make sure it's underlined or strike through or whatever. Once again, this was designed by committees over several decades, and it's never quite consistent, or at least nowhere near as consistent as you'd hope it would be. But anyway, there's our font weight bold. Okay, so that's pretty good. We have our big title, we have our thing here. Okay, let's take this other one here, because I want to make the, because we need to know the good things. This sort of a tagline. Let's give it a style. Okay, not style, class. I always mess this up. Okay, and then just like here, we can do tagline as a class. We can make it an ID, but generally if it's a type of thing that you're going to just use maybe in other places, you want to make it a class. If it's a specific thing on the page that's got a specific role, then you can make it an ID. This is one of those things you'll learn over time. So anyway, tagline, let's make that text align center and font style italic and font size 110%. Okay, there we go. And maybe we can give it a bit more space underneath. So this will be also margin bottom to EM. So EM is basically the height of the line of text given the current font size. So let's see, there we go, we got some spacing. Okay, now we have some more details, and then we have our content and our other content. And let's do the footer. Once again, it's a tag, so it's pretty straightforward. We can go border, and we can specify just the border top, 1 pixel solid, and we can do gray. You got to spell it the American way. Once again, as Canadians, the word color, we think to want a U in there. If you put a U in there, it will not recognize it. Okay, so it's color with an O, without the U. And then border top, and then maybe margin top 2em and padding top 10 pixels. Okay, there's our thing there. And maybe text align right, just for giggles. Okay, so there we go. Brought to you by Code School Halifax. There's all of our stuff. Okay. And maybe one last thing would be to change the A references to be a little bit better instead of colors. And maybe make them a different green. So let's go 188.283. Whoops. Where it's given us that. And let's go over and pick a slightly different tint, so it's easier to see what's going, that it's different. Okay, so there we go. Let's try that. There we go. Sort of they stick out a little bit differently. Okay, so that's better than that glaring purple. So there's our page, more or less, with some styling. Okay, now the page is looking better, but the fonts are kind of bland. It's still Times New Roman. It's not very exciting. And the problem with fonts is, of course, people are looking at this page possibly on any number of devices or computers out there on different operating systems all over the world. And we can't guarantee what fonts they're going to have on their computers. For example, Macintoshes all use Helvetica, but back in the day, Microsoft decided they didn't want to pay the licensing to actually use real Helvetica, so they came up with their own version called Arial, which some purists really get upset about. Anyway, you can never guarantee that if you say Helvetica, that you're going to get Helvetica, depending on the computer or system they're using. So fonts has traditionally been a difficult thing to do. But what's great is Google has come out with their own solution to allow you to embed fonts directly in the page, and that is at fonts.google.com. And you can just pick from the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fonts that they have here. And, you know, some of them are kind of bland, but you can see there's all these nice narrow ones. There's cool display fonts, weird typewriter-y looking ones. And if we go back up to the top, you can actually look down the categories. So here's all the display and handwriting fonts. There we go. So you can do all of this kind of stuff. You can pick these fonts and embed them straight in your app, which is really handy and solves a whole lot of the problems we've had over the years with doing fonts in the web. So I usually like to pick a display font for the headlines and then a sans serif for the body content. Everyone's got a different thing, but you know, Roboto is a nice clean one. Anyway, I've done a few. You can also do a search. I've done a bunch of searching already, so you can save you the trouble of watching me scroll through fonts and think if I want one or not. So I think I'm using Canet, but bold for our headline kind of font. And then another one called Open Sans for display. So let's make it, pick the bold. Okay, we select the style, it puts it in here. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And then we'll add more styles. And then close this out of the way. It keeps that handy. They just changed the interface for this, actually. Just yesterday, it feels like. So all of this is new to me here, but it's okay. It makes sense mostly. So we can, instead of Canet, let's go Open Sans. You can see here, this is nice and clean sort of font. So let's pick that and regular. Okay, so we've added these two. And let's see. View selected families. Review Open Sans regular, Canet bold. Okay. And now we can embed them. And so you go to here and it shows you all the stuff you need to do. So first step is you put this style sheet reference in the head section of your page. So let's do that. We'll go here, and it needs to go above your style sheet because the browser is going to start from the top and read everything in order. So if you haven't inserted the fonts yet, it won't know what fonts are that when you refer to them in the style sheet. So I just copied and pasted it and stuck it in here, and it's got this big long thing. But you can see it's basically link rel equals style sheet href something from Google. Okay. And then over here, it'll show you CSS rules to specify families, font family Canet sans serif, font family open sans serif. So let's do this and take Canet and make it the header 1 font. So the big headline font at the top. Just copied and pasted. And then let's take our open sans and apply it to everything else. So if you remember from the beginning, that's done by setting things in body. So everything's open sans except for the headline, which is Canet. So let's save that and put that away and reload. Okay, now we've got something that looks quite a bit nicer. I always find that once you put the fonts in, everything suddenly brightens. It suddenly feels like, we're really making something new. It's no longer Times New Roman. We've got something proper going on. It always feels like making progress once the fonts change. Maybe that's just me, but I definitely feel that this is definitely an improvement. Okay, and then this is good enough for now, I think. We can keep going, but I think it's time to move on to other things. We're going to start filling in some of the content. We're going to learn some JavaScript. And once we have more content, I find then it's a good time to go back and rethink some of the CSS. It's hard to know what looks good and what doesn't until we actually have content to look at. Plus, we're going to be seeing a few new things that we're going to be needing to style in a separate way. But this is pretty good for now. So this is a good start. And you see it's way different than it was already earlier. Now let's go in, and before we finish anything else, we have to do the all-important updating and taking a snapshot in Git. We got to commit our changes so that if we mess things up horribly, and it's really easy to mess things up horribly when you're doing CSS, if you inadvertently change a tag and apply things too much, you can make things really ugly and it's hard to go back. So it's really good to take a snapshot as regularly as possible, and you can see styles is untracked, it's new, so let's add that. And index has been modified. Now quickly you can show you, it's actually kind of neat. If you click on this, let's move this out of the way, it will actually show you all the changes that have been made since the last commit, which is really great. So in green, you can see we added our style sheet stuff. In red is the stuff we got rid of because we sort of replaced it with this, and it even shows you in highlights the bits that's been changed. And none of this rest of this stuff has been changed at all. You can even see sort of in this little mini map here on the side where the changes are. So this is a really handy way to reference what you were working on and what you changed before you actually commit it. Let's go back to here, and yes, we're good. And give it a note, added basic styling, and then commit. And now we're done. And if we look at our Git log, you can see now we have our starting version and our basic styling, okay? And now you can see how that goes there. So that is how you do your CSS. And you can see here, we've done a few small changes to here, but by adding the style sheet, the whole page is looking a whole lot better and more interesting. And like I said, we're going to come back later and really tune this up once we get moving with some of the more content. Okay, next stop is JavaScript. Hold on to your hats.